Tim, as someone who's done this for so long, made your living covering this sport, writing about this sport, as you know, you could argue the most important part of a story is the lead. If you were covering your induction this weekend, what do you think the lead would look like?
Well, I would lead with probably the greatest moment of the weekend for me, and this is going to be about me this time. Johnny Bench, after I spoke, took me out onto the veranda at the Oda Saga, and he says, "Come with me." We sat out on the veranda, just the two of us, and he said, "You're in the Hall of Fame. I want you to remember how you got here and who brought you here." And he said, "I want you to look at this lake now, and I don't want you to say a word for 1 minute. Just look at the lake and remember who you are, what you've accomplished, and how you got here." And I sat next to Johnny Bench for 1 minute, and I was in tears because the greatest catcher of all time took me out there and told me to do this, because this is a right of the Hall of Fame. He does this with all the players. Yesterday, he did it with one of the writers, and I can't even begin to tell you how powerful that was for me.
What were the things you were thinking about as you were looking out at the lake?
Well, I was thinking about my family, of course. I was thinking mostly about my father. Don't make me cry again here, but that's what my whole speech was about. It's about the people that helped me along the way, led by my father and my mother and my two brothers and my wife and two children. But when I looked out at that lake, I thought about my dad, who died in 2003, and I would have given anything for him to be here yesterday.
Baseball, Tim, as you know, better than anyone, is a sport that we hold so dear, in part because of the way it links generations. And your story, in that regard, is especially profound.
Yeah, that's what I love so much about the game, is the whole father and son thing. It starts with me and my father, me and my son Jeff. But what really touches me more than anything is when I go to a game or I go to Cooperstown and there's a dad taking his children to the game. I came here several years ago, and there was a preacher from Alabama that had brought his entire family with him, his 3 children and his wife, and they had gone to all 30 major league ballparks and finished in 30 days and finished their trip with a day at Cooperstown for the induction. And this is a preacher from Alabama. He said this was the greatest family trip we've ever had because we were all together. Baseball was involved, and to me that kind of sums up the generations of it. And I think that's what makes me so happy, is when I see a father and a son or daughter and a mother at a major league game together. That just warms my heart.
You have such reverence for the game, and you've been exposed to its inner workings for so long. Sometimes that kind of exposure might make someone jaded. It might repel you, but it's had the opposite effect on you. Why is that?
Well, again, I don't want to be corny about this, but this is all I've ever loved in my whole life. This is the primary language, baseball, that we spoke in my house growing up. So when I grow up watching Juan Marichal, and then I see him at the Hall of Fame, and I'm with my brother, Matt, who's not in this business like I am, and we're at a party, and Juan Marichal walks by, and my brother looks at me and goes, "Oh my God, that's Juan Marichal." That's what still matters to me, because it doesn't matter that I've interviewed him or he hadn't played in 40 years. It's that I watched him pitch in 1966. I watched these guys play, and now I'm right there with them. And I remember back to when they were players as opposed to what they look like now or what they are like now. But that's what still makes me the happiest, is when I get to tell people, I get to write about someone and explain how great this player was. That's the favorite part of my job, is to tell people, this is how great Hank Aaron was. This is how great Willie Mays was. I wrote 6,000 words on Willie Mays last year on his 90th birthday, and that might be my favorite story I've ever written, because it was about one of my boyhood baseball heroes, Willie Mays, and on his 90th birthday.
You are a hero too, to people. I know you don't like hearing it, but you are, and it's because of the way you've done this job for so long, and the enthusiasm. But not just the enthusiasm. We talk about that a lot, but the skill and the caring and the hard work and the fairness. When you think about the traits that have distinguished your career, what stands out?
Well, in journalism school, we asked our professor, the main guy in our journalism school at Maryland, what's the most important thing in journalism? He said, fairness and accuracy. As long as you're fair and you're accurate, you don't have to worry about what you wrote. If somebody gets angry at you, which has happened to all of us, if I can go to bed at night saying, I wrote a fair story today and I know I got it right, then everything else is good after that. And I'm just a curious fellow. I'm just curious about baseball and maybe basketball to some degree, but that's what has kept me going. That's what kept my curiosity up all these years. It's just going to baseball games, and that's what really has driven me. Is, as I've told you before, when you go to a game, you might see something you've never seen before in your life, and there's nothing better than that.
When we've talked to people about you the last few days, over the years, one thing that people talk about is the way that you find the good in people, the people that you cover, the good in the game. But of course, that's not always an option. Sometimes there are other things that have to be covered. How have you balanced those competing interests and your own desire to find the good in people?
Well, I never shy away from a difficult story or a controversial story. I've had to write and talk about steroids for 20 years, and I haven't enjoyed 1 second of it, but it's part of the job, and I will do it. But when push comes to shove, if you're going to give me a story that is wildly negative or something that's going to tell everybody how great a baseball player Al Kaline was, I'm sorry, I'm going to pick the Al Kaline story. I think that's just my nature, and I'm not apologizing for that. But when I lose my credibility if I'm not critical of people, if I'm not telling the truth or being accurate. So I'm always going to do that. But if you're asking me what would I rather do, I think it's human nature. I would rather do something that makes people happy, makes them smile while informing them, rather than tearing down somebody, even if somebody deserves it. But I'll be critical when I have to be, but I'm not looking for it. And if it finds me, I'll write it.
One of the things that comes through in your work is this passion for the game, of course. And also it seems imbued with a sense that the game is a metaphor for larger things in life. How does baseball reflect the real world in real life? And in what ways does it?
Well, to me, one of the great beauties of baseball is the modern era in baseball is defined as 1900 on. That's the modern era.
Right.
And to me, that's what I love so much about it, is the history and the traditions of the game. I mean, every time I go to Fenway Park, I think Ted Williams played left field right there. Babe Ruth pitched right there. And it's still the same configuration. That kind of stuff amazes me. I just love how difficult the game is to play, but I also love how it's open to all shapes and sizes. That Jose Altuve is an inch taller than me, and he's a great player. And Aaron Judge is 6'7", 282, and their team, they play against each other, and they're right there in the MVP race. I just think baseball kind of mirrors how the country has gone over the years. And, it sounds corny, but the whole Field of Dream things, the world has gone on, but baseball has always been there in the middle. And that's the way that I've always looked at it. And that's what I gather when I meet average fans on the field. After the Cubs won in 2016, I go back to my hotel. It's 1:30 in the morning, and there's a grown man my age crying at the elevator. And he's got a Cubs shirt on. So I said, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "I just called my father. He's 95. He's never seen them win before. So I just called and spoke to my father." That's the kind of thing that really gets to me.
And that's baseball.
That's baseball. It's it's older than everything else. And being old, I kind of like old. I've always kind of liked old, but I also think that this is the one sport where you can go back 100 years and take the biggest and best players from back then, Walter Johnson, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth. I think they could all play today. Most people totally disagree with me. I don't think you can say that about football or basketball players. Those are so athletic, those sports, but the skill required to play baseball, I think if you're the biggest and the best player of your time, even 100 years ago, you could play today, and I love that too.
Tim, baseball people know the famous quotation, Jacques Barzun, the eminent historian, anyone who wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn this game, baseball. Is that still true?
I hope so. I mean, let's be honest. Football is king in this country. Baseball, sadly, has fallen behind basketball too. And I like those two sports, and I love basketball. But it pains me that baseball is not the number one sport anymore. It pains me to see attendance down, ratings down, and people just not as interested in the World Series anymore. You know, Dodgers and Yankees might play this year. I'm just not sure people in the middle of the country are going to be that interested in it. And that's really sad, because as corny as it sounds, it's still the national pastime to me. It is still the greatest game ever. It is still the hardest game in the world to play. And I hope we get it back to the form it used to be. More balls in play, more strikes thrown, more hitters swinging at a pitch as opposed to taking and trying to get a ball up in the air. Those are the things I worry about. But I also never worry about the game. It always corrects itself, whether it's the steroid era or the Black Sox scandal. It always corrects itself, and it will. It's just going to take a little time this time.
What would you change about the game?
I would put in a pitch clock and tell them, let's pick this up a little bit. And Mark Teixeira has convinced me I would do something with the shift also. I would start every play. At least I would try to see if this works. Put two infielders on each side of the bag. Everyone's feet on the dirt when we start the play. Now that left-handed hitter who looks out and sees three guys on the right side and says, well, I can't hit it through that because there are three guys over there. I have to hit it over that. That's where he tries to lift the ball. That's where all the walks, strikeouts, and homers come from. If he looks out there and he sees there's an actual hole up the middle, I can hit a ground ball or a line drive up the middle and get a hit. Maybe that would change the thinking of the hitter. I think it's worth a try. I just know the athletes we have on the field today are stunningly good, and we don't get to see them be as athletic as we like. We don't see our middle infielders making great plays because the ball isn't in play enough. We don't get to see anybody run first to third like we used to. Those were my favorite days. Ball in play, action every play, and we need more of that.
There are the statistics, and there are the outcomes, and there's all that stuff around the game. But it comes down to, and it certainly has in your reporting on it, the people. The people around the game, the people who play the game, the managers, the coaches, the scouts, everybody in the infrastructure of baseball. What is being around all of these people for the last 40 years? How has it increased your understanding of humankind?
Well, your dad used to say, I collect people. On a different level, I collect stories from people, and I could tell you hours and hours of stories about the people I've met. I mean, let's just take Buck Showalter, for instance. I sat next to that guy for 5 years watching games at ESPN, going to games with him, and he would look at me and say things like, you ever seen a great player who has a lot of freckles? That's what he would ask me. These are the questions we ask in baseball. And I say, Buck, Rusty Staub. And he said, I said a great player, not a really good player. So these are the kind of things that baseball offers. These crazy things, these beautiful things that just make you think more often. And the people I've run into over the years are, I remember Bobby Cox. I asked him, first time you saw Chipper Jones, what did you think? He said, well, I knew he was going to be a great player right away. I said, how'd you know? He goes, oh, that face. I just had to see his face. I said, what does that mean? How could you tell if he's a great player by looking at his face? He goes, baseball people can tell right away. Same Buck Showalter went to see a minor league kid one night, and I said, so what'd you see? What'd you see in that kid? He goes, oh, loved him. Square head, great face. That's how he described the player. Square head, great face. And he knew this kid was going to be good. So I still can't figure that part out. As many games as I've watched, as many people I've talked to, I can't look at a player's face and say he's a great player. But this is what, to me, separates baseball. This is what worries me about our whole sabermetric and advanced analytics situation. I'm not sure we're looking at their faces anymore, and I think we should.
All the quirky things you love about the game and the anomalies that you talk about and how there's always something new in every box score. What's your favorite crazy baseball fact, quirk, statistic? The one that just still you marvel at?
There are so many. I mean, Stan Musial had exactly as many hits at home as he did on the road for his entire career. I mean, that's impossible to do. Prince Fielder and Cecil Fielder, father-son, both finished with 319 home runs. Exactly. How can that happen? Dennis Eckersley picked off Kenny Williams in a game and then went 3.5 years until he picked off somebody else, and then he picked off Kenny Williams again. This is the beauty of baseball, is how little things like this, if you watch closely enough, they're there every single day. As you may know, Jeremy, I know the leading home run hitter for every letter of the alphabet, which is really pathetic. But the H is two guys who have the same last name. So Ryan and Frank Howard both have 382 home runs, and they're the leaders for the letter H. I should know who all the Supreme Court justices are. I should know a lot more than I do, but those are the kind of things that I know and I love, and I've found over the years there are other people that like it too. So I'm going to keep finding those things because it makes me happy, and apparently it makes other people some days happy also.
It has. I've asked you this before, but I feel it's important to come back to your passion for the game, which you've had your whole life and came from your father. Has it ever dissipated, even for a moment?
It hasn't, Jeremy. Again, the box scores start the day, and when you look at those box scores every day, it's the greatest thing ever for me because there's so many stories to be told from the box scores. So once every day starts with the box scores and a Diet Mountain Dew at 6 o'clock in the morning, I feel like I'm ready for anything that day. And again, I still love to walk into a ballpark. I've covered a game in like 59 different stadiums. Some only for one game, Fort Bragg, Williamsport, things like that. But I've never lost my love for the game because, and I've told you this before, Jeremy, I don't have a whole lot of interests. I'm not very good at most things. So when I found something that I'm good at or I like to do, I'm going to stick with it. My memory for things outside of baseball, not very good. But I can remember uniform numbers and statistics and games and conversations I had because I just have that kind of love for the game, and I always have. And I think I always will.
You've talked many times about 2,131 being the most special night of your career in baseball, the most special moment you covered. And there are a few words that you've used to describe why it was important. Would you tell us again, what are those words?
Yeah, that was the most powerful night that I've ever spent in a major league park because it was about much more than baseball. That was about loyalty, and that was about discipline, and that was about neighborhood, and that was about toughness, and that was about showing up every day. That's what I admired so much about Cal Ripken, is that story was what baseball is all about. He came to work every day and wanted to play. So when you find someone who's that disciplined, that loyal, those are the kind of things that I think really set him apart, and that's why I believe baseball started its return to prominence, because it was Cal Ripken's chase of Lou Gehrig that got it going.
Those values, those principles, they don't just apply to Cal Ripken. I think anyone who knows you would say they apply to you too.
Well, I'm certainly loyal to the game. I certainly have enough discipline to cut out box scores every day for 20 years and tape them in my little book. I think we can all agree that's way more impressive than any streak put together by Cal Ripken. But if you're going to do the job, you have to do it right. This is a daily game. You can't take a week away from this and feel like you know what you're talking about. The worst day ever is when it takes me halfway through the day, which almost never happens before I get to the box scores. I just don't feel right. So loyalty to the game, discipline to the job is really, really important. At least it is to me.
Your nature, by nature, you are self-effacing. But have you allowed yourself a moment here as we celebrate you, as baseball celebrates you, to say, okay, I did it. I did it well.
Yeah, I did that last night after the stress of my speech was gone. I sat alone in my room last night in the Oda Saga, the only time I've ever spent a night in the Oda Saga. And I said...
Tough reservation.
Yes. I said, all those nights that I've been away from home, all those nights that I sweated through deadlines, all those days that I woke up in the morning praying that the guy at the other paper didn't have something that I had, something I didn't have, I thought, okay, this is all worth it now, because my family was with me and they're the ones who got left behind in this process to some degree. So last night, sitting in a dark room, that was the one moment where I said, okay, maybe I do belong here, because it took me a long time to figure that out.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.